Few cars divide opinion quite like the Aston Martin Cygnet. Should a supercar brand really be producing a city car? Well, the Eurocrats have made it necessary, as have the needs of the company's customers, people wanting an urban runabout handcrafted for metro motoring. Expensive, desirable and very rare, just as every Aston Martin should be. The world is changing and small cars must change with it. No longer simply cheap runabouts, they must become all things to all people. It isn't only frugal folk, you see, who need to get around the city, but as it is, well-heeled buyers needing a compact car must travel in the same budget transport as the rest of us. It isn't right. They don't think it is anyway, and neither do Aston Martin, which is why they bought us this car, the Cygnet. Well, actually, that's not the only reason. European Union regulations require car makers to cut their fleet's average CO2 emissions by 35% from 1995 levels, with draconian penalties to be applied to those who don't comply by 2015. Not an easy target to meet if you're not owned by a volume brand and all you make are supercars. For Aston, the Cygnet makes compliance possible, at the same time ensuring the future of all the DB, Vantage, Virage and Rapide models we love so much. And for that reason, it's a very welcome car indeed. View it from the side and you might remember where you've seen this shape before. It's a Toyota IQ city car on a night out, a very special one indeed. Aston has taken the Japanese design and handcrafted it again from scratch with the same care given to a supercar. The result's expensive, but it's also the most desirable small car ever made, and we're going to test it. Wander around the marina in Monte Carlo, or indeed any other waterborne playground of the super rich, and you'll see that the largest luxury yachts have tenders. Little boats designed to ferry crew and passengers on small local trips. Now they're leather-lined and beautifully built, these tenders, and perfect for purpose. And this is exactly the role that Aston Martin envisages for this Cygnet in a well-heeled family that probably already has perhaps a Virage and a Vantage residing in a beautifully appointed oak frame garage. A supercar is, after all, a little over the top, simply to nip into town to pick up a bottle of milk, and a nuisance to manoeuvre if your business takes you into tight city centres. A Cygnet, in contrast, is the car that you'd rather use on such an occasion. Now, I can't really understand the writers who create about this model, wringing their hands and wondering why potential buyers didn't just save themselves £20,000 and buy the Toyota IQ upon which it's based. Well, yes, they could have done. Just as Prince Rainier of Monaco could save a lot of money and travel out to his luxury yacht in a rubber dinghy. But why would he want to? You buy this car because you're the kind of person who in everything simply buys the best, regardless of cost. And the best miniature city car out there is arguably Toyota's IQ, in terms of its space efficiency, its fuel and CO2 returns, and its sheer urban chuckability. The Smart 4 is smaller, but noisy, jerky to drive and frustratingly impractical. No, if you wanted a shore base from which to create the perfect urban runabout, this is it. So, given that there was no point in trying to redevelop what was already pretty good, Aston left the dynamics of this model pretty much alone, which means that Cygnet buyers get the same 99 brake horsepower, 1.33 litre petrol engine, well familiar to owners of pokier IQs. Performance, for the reasons I've already explained, is actually pretty irrelevant, but since this car has an Aston Martin badge on the bonnet, I better tell you what it is. Rest to 60 occupying 11.6 seconds on the way to a top speed of 106 miles an hour. That's assuming that, like most buyers, you specify the optional CVT automatic transmission. I'm not quite sure why anyone would buy this car with the standard 5-speed manual gearbox, though that's what I've got here. Either way, the performance on offer is actually quite nippy in an urban setting, with ride quality and body control first rate for a model with such a short wheelbase. At lower speeds, the steering's electrical assistance and tight 4-metre turning circle make manoeuvring this car into even the tiniest parking spaces a piece of cake. In fact, around town you find yourself actively looking for opportunities to twirl this little Aston around on a sixpence. And if your search for Havana cigars takes you a little further afield than expected and you find yourself in your Cygnet on the open road, you should find it all to be pretty refined, unless you really start to put your foot down, at which point things all start to get a bit thrashy. The suspension does tend to run out of travel on really bad bumps too. Better to return this car to its urban comfort zone as soon as possible and enjoy an urban trinket perfectly fit for purpose. What might a little city car be like if it were to be hand-built to the same standards as an exclusive supercar? In this Cygnet, we have our answer. Each model begins life as an ordinary Japanese-built Toyota IQ before arriving at a special division within Aston Martin's Gaydon factory, where its life begins again. Given that there was no need to fiddle with the basic design or dynamics of the donor model, the British brand has thrown all its efforts into trimming, polishing and perfecting something that, to be honest, wasn't too far off the mark to start with. Indeed, given that over 150 man-hours is spent on each Cygnet, you could reasonably argue that this model is more bespoke than one of Aston's supercars, built from scratch in not much more than that. Trimming requires no fewer than 7 hides of leather, which is just as many as are used in a DB9, and that's why you get such a beautiful aroma upon opening the door. Look around and almost everything that isn't covered in carefully stitched leather is swathed in Alcantara, which is nearly as nice. All the main things that you use and touch are Aston's own. The grippy 3-spoke steering wheel, the gear lever in its own bespoke quadrant, the ultra-thin rev counter and speedo needles. It's all a million miles away, not only from anything Toyota might have dreamed of, but anything any city car driver could ever have wished for. And that's of course before you start adding your own bespoke touches, for as with any Aston Martin there's an almost endless palette of paint finishes, which is one of the reasons why there's virtually no chance of 2 identical Cygnets ever leaving the factory, let alone meeting up on the road. If you're not familiar with the basic Toyota IQ design, then it still has the power to impress, with an innovative asymmetric dashboard that's scooped out on the front passenger side to enable one fully sized adult to sit behind another. There's also additional room for a very small child behind the driver, if need be. And the width of the cabin impresses too, with shoulder to shoulder width for driver and front passenger, bearing comparison with something Mondeo sized. All of that is made possible via a flat underfloor fuel tank, a heater unit that's 20% smaller and repositioned steering gear. It's a pity though that the steering wheel adjusts only for rake and not for reach, though that is to some extent mitigated by the provision of a height adjustable driver's seat. And luggage space? Well, there's only 32 litres with all the seats in use, but otherwise it's better than you might expect for a car of this kind. You've got a concealed compartment down here to keep valuables away from prying eyes, and you can push the rear seats, they're split folding, forward to free up 238 litres of total room. And you can make good use of what there is, thanks to the way that the rear bench folds up cinema seat style, revealing the hidden tray beneath and enabling you, if for example you visited the garden centre, to more easily store taller items. As for the outside styling, well, the first thing to say is that the front end looks 100 times better than the beaky nose Toyota foists upon the IQ. The Cygnet's front grille is unmistakably Aston, finished with carefully crafted extruded aluminium bars from the same supplier that makes pieces for the £1.2 million Aston 177. From the outside, this car shares only its roof with an IQ, all the other body panels being hand-built by Aston craftsmen before being subjected to a 7-coat paint process that produces a glass-like finish. I particularly like the little touches, the way that the badges are inset into the bodywork, just as they are on larger Astons. The gorgeous alloy wheels, the bespoke door handles, the sporty side skirts and the neat rear roof spoiler. This car, of course, needs all the identity it can get. Just as well then that Aston has given it plenty. Now, given that we're talking here of a city car, priced in the £30,000 to £40,000 bracket, depending on the spec and options you choose, then you won't need me to tell you that it's in a class of its own. Still, with only around 1,500 units annually scheduled for worldwide sale, Aston Martin doesn't have to worry about appealing to a mass market. The people the company has in mind for this car would no more compare it to a Toyota IQ or a Smart 4.2 at a third of the price than they would compare their motoring costs to the outlay needed to cover similar journeys on public transport. And these, it should be pointed out, aren't only people being targeted by Aston. Rolls-Royce, after all, has produced a limited edition Mini Goodwood costing even more. Standard equipment on the Cygnet includes most of the items you would expect to find on a plush runabout. So you'll find auto headlights and wipers, rear privacy glass, rear parking sensors, a portable satellite navigation system, climate controlled air conditioning, a trip computer, a 6-speaker CD stereo with AUX in socket, keyless entry for the central locking and a lovely glove box bag. Safety-wise, there are Isofix child seat fixings in the rear and all the usual airbags, including curtain airbags and one for the driver's knee, plus the usual electronic assistance for braking, traction and stability to hopefully ensure that you'll never have to use them. Essentially though, specifying this car is about how much further you want to go. Will you, for example, be replacing the gorgeous 8-spoke alloy wheels supplied in the basic package with a set of even smarter 16-spoke ones? And what will your choice be between the almost endless palette of paint finishes and leather hides on offer? As long as money is no object, creating your own interpretation of Cygnet motoring promises to be a very pleasurable task. In contrast to other city cars, buyers of this one will certainly not be prioritising low running costs, but they'll get them anyway. Aston Martin predicting a CO2 return of 116 grams per kilometre and a combined cycle fuel reading of 56.5 miles to the gallon for the 5-speed manual and 54.3 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and 120 grams per kilometre of CO2 for the CVT automatic. So if piloting your Rapide through the higgledy-piggledy streets of Monaco or Mayfair is too nerve-wracking to contemplate, here's the perfect solution. These figures come courtesy of the 1.33-litre Toyota petrol engine's dual VVTi technology, which continuously adjusts inlet and outlet valves to achieve an extremely efficient combustion process. The stop and start technology that cuts the power when you don't need it, when you're sat stationary in a queue or when you're waiting at the lights, has the potential to lead to fuel consumption improvements of up to 3% in urban areas where being sat stationary in traffic has become the norm rather than the exception. The only fly in the ointment here is probably the issue of depreciation, a difficult thing to judge with a car of this kind. It'll probably depend on exclusivity and just how well Aston has judged potential demand. To understand this Cygnet, you have to cast aside conventional thinking. It's a small car, certainly, but it's not been primarily created that way to offer small running costs. So it's pointless to judge it against cheaper products built to do just that. It's there to make the point that luxury need not be constrained by scale. Why can't a little city runabout be as plush and exclusive as a limousine or a supercar? Ultimately, the success of this model will probably have nothing to do with its price. It'll be down to whether potential customers accept this car as a true Aston Martin. If they do, they'll have no qualms in buying it, whatever the final figure on the cheque required. And if they do, they'll be playing their part in safeguarding the future of one of Britain's most famous motoring names. Look at me, I'm making an argument for traditionalists to buy the least traditional car this British brand has ever made. Whoever would have thought it?